Hey guys.
Hi.
Welcome to another Level Up Tuesday. This is where we have one speaker come in every month to give one of their in-depth talks about something adjacent to games or about games. Then we have people network for about 2 hours. So before then, what is IGDA? It is our International Game Developer Association. And we are the New York City chapter where our whole purpose is literally to make game devs and basically open a lot of opportunities to see what events and networking you guys can do in your New York sphere. We're trying to bring a whole bunch of communities together and we're trying to have a good time doing it. All right. And now I know you have a whole bunch to talk about yourself,
I got like a thing.
but first and foremost, this is my good friend Josh. Also, Josh, our for being here.
Yeah.
He's telling you to say something. You're not like.
What am I saying? Get drinks. I don't know. Here, Josh.
Thank you. Hello. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay. It's like doing that thing where you're on the stage and you can't hear the mic. Before I actually start the talk, like any talk that I do, I like to do a funny thing because I know a lot of you, but I also don't know a lot of you. So I think what I'd like to do. He's laughing at me already. What I'd like to do is have everybody snap with one hand at the same time on the count of 3. Is everybody okay with that? So don't do it yet, but it's going to be 3, 2, 1, snap, and we're all going to snap. And I just want to hear how it sounds because it's like fun, right? Is that okay with everybody? Thumbs up. Is anybody going to be like, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard? Okay. One time I did this with like everybody cracking their knuckles, and somebody like left the room. It felt really bad. Okay. So ready? Are y'all ready? Okay. 3, 2, 1, snap. That's cool, right? Like it kind of rippled backwards. That's neat. So yeah, you all know me a little bit better. My name's Josh. I know a lot of you. A lot of Gumbo people are here. I come to the IGDA stuff. One time I called it the IGDA, and I really felt bad about that. But yeah, I've been coming to these talks for a while, and then they asked me to do one. So I'm a full-time resident at Gumbo. I'm a game designer and developer at Wirescribe. I also teach occasionally as an adjunct professor of games at Pratt and NYU. And you might know me from a bunch of stuff, but what are we actually talking about today? This is specifically a talk titled, We Are Only as Good as Our Tools. And it's going to be talking about this very specific concept of like tool making out of systems. But we're going to be a less like hard coding and more abstract concepts. And all the tools available in here are actually available as open source under CC BY NCSA, which basically means that you can use them for non-commercial things in their own form, but if you modify them, you just have to attribute the original form back to that. So the core thesis of this talk is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of different examples of this that I'm going to go through, but it's that everything can be a tool and everything can do a lot, which I feel like is kind of a weird thesis statement, but we can get into that. But what does that actually mean? Usually when we're building games, we're constantly making systems, we're making new things. But why can't we take our systems and make them into reusable tools? I think that's something that I've sort of thought about a lot. But what is a tool? I mean, the actual definition of a tool, I'm doing the cliche thing where you read the definition. It's that it's a device used to carry out a particular function. That's like a thing I think we all basically understand. But to me, it's not really how game tooling should be. I have like a really hard opinion on this, that game tools should be aggregate and holistic. So they're aggregate because they're made up of pieces, and they're holistic because they operate by your rules, right? They're understood implicitly. So there's this concept called single responsibility principle in computer science that I'd like to just introduce to everyone. I know I'm throwing around a lot of words, but it'll become clear over time, I hope. But Robert C. Martin, who's like the grandfather of computer science and wrote the Agile Manifesto and all that stuff, basically said that a module should be responsible to one and only one actor. So that core idea is that when you're programming something, it should do one thing. It shouldn't do like a bajillion things, right? So every aspect should be handled on its own. And if your scripts focus on specific things, they're easier to transfer. And as a general rule, the more segmented they are, the easier they are for anyone to use, right? So elements made up of aggregate components allow us to more easily reuse and manipulate them, right? So you can see that I have a few Unity objects there, and the player has all these different things on it because it does a lot of different stuff. It's not just one gigantic script, but then even in the basic Unity elements like the main camera and the main UI canvas, you could just have like those core Unity components already in there, right? So they're already sort of broken up with this aggregate philosophy. So model view controllers, in my opinion, is anybody not familiar with a model view controller? Okay, so a model view controller is basically the idea that the thing that the user is seeing on the screen is not fully representative of what's happening in the background. So if you're programming a website with a payment system, that payment system may be programmed completely differently than how it's displayed. You're only seeing the results of that payment system. So that's not holistic. So in this example, the player, the user at the bottom middle, inputs a jump. The controller then requests the jump. The model then displays a jump happening. And then in the view, you are blinded by lies because you're not actually jumping. It just looks like you're jumping. So that's not holistic. If your tools aren't holistic, they become really difficult to use, right? So if your information's not actually happening, then it's not very easily accessible. If you make it holistic and you make it accessible, then even non-technical members of your team can begin to use your tools. So if you get rid of your model view controller and actually have things really happen in real life in the game, then information is accessible and you can use it, right? So if you're fed, as a player even, if you're fed immediate and accurate information in real time, then that lets you as the player understand how the world works, right? Your game feels more authentic and more real. And they also operate by your standards, right? So like the things that you are doing are actually happening, and therefore it is easier to work with because they feel believable, because there are rules in how this world works. But what do I mean really happen? Because it's a video game, it's not actually happening. It's like a digital thing, right? It's not like a, I mean, I think it's really happening, but do you see this thing? You guys all see that thing? I presume we all know what that thing is, but specifically like that thing, you see that thing? That weird thing that looks kind of like a nipple? That's the first popularized analog stick, and it kind of let this happen where, is this gonna blast out of the speakers really loud? I hope not. This is supposed to be Mario 64 gameplay on the screen, but apparently it's not loading at all. But basically, it allowed for, I wish I downloaded this video too, but it allowed for games to have this new form of depth, right? This whole new kind of way to control. It was an input that you could do in degrees and motion and force and have that apply in a game in a meaningful way. And this is just not happening, so I'm going to move on. But basically the idea here being that you could tilt it a little bit and it would move a little bit, or you could tilt it a lot and it would move a lot. And your inputs felt like they were making a stronger impact in the game because your moment-to-moment decision-making was really making a huge difference, right? So analog became standard, and I did, just in case you're curious, I did stand on a chair in my apartment to take this photo. I put a bunch of controllers out to illustrate this, but when you had the N64 controller come out with its analog stick, remember that the Sony PlayStation had already been released. They had already prepared and made this console. And then they re-released the same controller at the end of the PlayStation 1's life cycle with analog sticks because it was so popular, right? And then every single controller after this had analog sticks. And my point here is to illustrate the idea and the fact that a holistic thing had such a strong impact on how we all play video games and how we touch these digital worlds that it changed how we make controllers forever, right? There's nothing about any new controller. I guess even the Playdate has an analog crank, right? Even if it doesn't have a joystick. There's always an analog component that lets us put in a sensitive motion. And then just some examples of that analog input here, right? The N64 let the analog stick move, and that let Super Mario happen, but the analog triggers on the GameCube, which granted Nintendo never put back for some reason, they allowed for Mario Sunshine to happen because you can control water pressure. And then everybody remembers the Wii, and it came out and Mario Kart was happening, and you could turn the controller to turn the guy on the screen, and that's amazing. That's really cool. That's really interesting. And it's just because analog inputs make you feel like you're doing a real thing, and that real thing is affecting a digital thing, right? It makes them feel real. And holistic systems feel good because their feedback feels real, right? I think it's the same principle, that a physical thing moving in the real world, moving a thing in the digital world, has the same kind of effect as a holistic system with real rules happening in this real space to make that feedback feel real. So I'm going to go through a few tools. I'm going pretty rapid fire because I don't want to run out of time. But we'll start with the player controller, and we'll go through other different things that are pretty common, and then we have one I think I have one or two oddball tools. But when I was designing this player controller, this is the same player controller I've used for basically all of my games. I don't think there's a single game where I haven't at least like copied something from it. But it's fairly aggregate. It's completely aggregate because all these components work together. And it's holistic because it operates basically in any space that I drop it into. So I can just put it in, I've put it in my first game, and then I put it in like my most recent game. And in both of these cases, it works. Like I just drop it in and it works. And it's made up of a series of specialized parts, but none of those parts is so dependent on the whole that they couldn't work on their own. So those parts are not codependent, right? And then one thing that I think I haven't seen a lot of people do this, but I just serialize everything. Like I make everything exposed so I can modify everything and see everything that's happening if I want to get that really specific game feel. And I think that generally speaking, I just also instance everything. So everything is modifiable, everything is accessible. There's never a point at which you can't like touch stuff, right? And then I make it really superfluous because I'm kind of insane. But I usually leave in like all of the elements that are outside of that. And then this is kind of what happened with it. It kind of did a bunch of stuff, right? It went to a bunch of different games that I've made. It started out as this first-person controller in 2019, and then I just kind of took it and did other stuff. There's like third person, and I wrote other person because I don't know. And then at one point, I just decided I'm going to see if I can push this into like a 2D thing, and that's what that tiny little Easter egg in the bottom corner is as well. But I kind of define these as conspecific uses and heterospecific uses, which are just really fancy ways of saying similar or different. The similar uses are just like, first-person character controllers, first-person like player controllers or third-person player controllers that are pretty much just like, oh, you're moving around in a space, right? You're doing something in a space. But then the heterospecific ones are like, oh, there's a target in the space, there's a thing moving in this space, but it's not exactly the focus of the thing in that whole space, right? So you're not the main character. And then there's the interspecific one, which is like to say it's kind of similar, but that's just like because the one in Godwalker, you can like when you get killed, your like camera goes flying across the room to illustrate that you've blown up because you're a robot, and then it bounces around the room, and yeah, so it's got like multiple purposes there. The second tool is a third-person camera controller. So there are a few different holistic elements that it needed and a few different aggregate elements that it needed. It had to be like really easy to control and really responsive. It had to avoid objects. It had to be smooth, and it needed a dialogue mode. For the aggregate elements, I just had to be able to drop it in, and it worked in a space. I couldn't do anything special to it. I couldn't put tags in the environment. I didn't want to have to like, I don't know, make composite colliders and stuff like that. It needed a profile system and mode switching, and most importantly, it needed to be like, if I wanted it to act a certain way in a certain scenario, it had to have that really, what I call like strong hand manipulation, which is, I think, a real term, but I can't remember where I heard it. But before you ask, I don't like Cinemachine. I think Cinemachine is just the worst thing. It hurts me and it makes me sad. I tried using Cinemachine for a long time, and it just made me, like this guy from Scott Pilgrim, it made me sad, so very, very sad. And so I just decided not doing that. So I spent a lot of time doing research. So this is a game called Stray, and I'm sure that everybody here has sort of heard of it or seen it. You play as this cat in like a dystopia. It's pretty cool. But it has these really nice features of object avoidance and really accurate following. And I actually have noticed that most third-person camera controllers for like characters who stand fully right up, they focus on like the center of their torso. So I couldn't find a good reference for the specific kind of controller that I needed, because those ones that are higher up, they tend to just kind of push forward and push back really fast, and the camera isn't smooth, and it's hard to focus on objects in the environment. So I looked at this, and I spent a lot of time with it. And then I also just took a look at Fallout 4's dialogue positioning, and I'm glad this one's actually playing. But when you have a conversation in Fallout 4, after you do the intro dialogue, it then goes into what I feel like is called sort of the cinematic camera position. That's like a dynamic position where the camera either is in a medium shot, a medium close, or a close-up camera view. So in this case, that's like medium close with Codsworth the robot. And then I think it's going to give the player a dialogue decision. And then you'll see that it transfers out in a sec here. This is like the very beginning of the game from 10 years ago, so I hope nobody is upset with spoilers. But yeah, that's like a close-up shot. And the camera basically moves around this area, and it tracks your position. We'll talk about that more in a sec. But for object avoidance, the biggest challenge here was actually getting the camera to move out of the way fast enough. By far, the issue that I faced was that the camera would move through stuff to get away from it, or it would clip really fast, and that wouldn't look very good. There was an interesting solution that I had found. First, this one was a sphere cast. So I actually just checked basically a tube from the camera to the player and saw if anything was interrupting it by the width of like the camera's sort of size, essentially, and then moved it forward really, really fast and smoothly so that it doesn't clip through a wall or look gross. The other thing that I found is that if something was close to the player and the player could swing the camera in front of that, sort of like that intersection with that orange circle on the right with that obstacle, I could move the camera in preemptively, which made it so that when you walked into a really small hallway, it's like, oh, now we're moving into this small hallway, but then you go out and it's like, oh, now we're outside again. It makes a lot of sense for keeping the camera out of objects. And then this is the dialogue positioning with the shots that I was mentioning. So you have the medium shot, medium close-up, and then close-up. And this is what I deduced from playing Fallout 4 for like 250 hours and then going back to take a look at it. Basically what the game does is if you have more than one NPC, it then finds a series of positions in the environment without any objects. There's like nothing there, nothing interrupting the view. That's what those green lines represent. And then it chooses these camera positions and has the camera move around in a circle in all these positions over and over. I don't know why they chose to do that. I mean, it looks good, but it's almost there, in my opinion. I don't know the solution, but if you watch this again, you'll see that after the player character talks to Codsworth and makes a dialogue decision, the camera actually takes one of these positions, right? And now we're focusing on the player. And then if we skip forward here, you can see that what they've actually done here is a rule of thirds framing for each of those camera positions and each of those camera targets, which is really clever. That's like really hard to do because there are thousands of conversations in this game in thousands or hundreds of locations, and I just thought that was really impressive. The other things like strong hand changes that needed to happen with that camera were temporary short changes and dynamic wide shots. So I checked out like Psychonauts, which is this third-person platformer. If you haven't played it, you should check it out. But in the one on the left, you can see that the main character, Rasputin, he's jumping on a trampoline, and that camera is now suddenly moving up and down really quickly. Or the one on the right, we're in this boss fight, and it's much wider. It's really far back compared to how it usually is. So I did all that research, and then I put it into this game. Shout out to Unwound. I know Valentina's here. She's waving. So how'd that actually go? It actually went really well. So the object avoidance, it was really hard to implement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that camera moving backwards. That was something I didn't expect. But having the camera actually move forwards using a sphere cast was kind of like, it's like everything I needed in my whole life, basically, when I figured that out. And then also just that maximum distance that the camera could sit at. The accurate following as well, depending on the area that you were in, the camera, for the most part, follows you pretty well on the X and the Z axes, but it's the Y axis that I actually found the most trouble with. So like moving vertically was just a nightmare sometimes. So in some areas and in some profiles for the camera, actually just follow it, just lock onto it, like don't even mess around. So there was also the character dialogue. I didn't get as far with it as I'd like to, but the basic element of like moving into a position and looking at something is there. The wide follow was actually really cool. That's the prototype shot that I took when I had figured out sort of the easiest way to do that. In most cases in the game, when you get to like a wall, you like get there and then the camera zooms out, right? And then you can see the whole thing. And then another big thing about a third-person camera controller that nobody really thinks about is looking up. And that's not a thing in the majority of these like big blockbuster things. And when you do, it usually like pans down behind the character's foot and it like looks up. I was okay with that idea, but when it really came down to it, I felt like it just had to be like this, right? Where you're kind of looking inside of the character's head, which I think is looks a lot more believable. I think it looks better. But you don't really have a reason to look up immediately up in like The Last of Us, really, but like you do kind of look up when you're doing sort of some of the missions in like buildings. And then there's the dynamic dolly. So this is sort of a problem that I faced for the longest time. The camera would move in, and then it would immediately move back out the moment that it could, which is great for action games. But if your game isn't like a super fast-paced third-person shooter, it can get really jerky and gross and bad and really take you out of it. So if you watch this clip, you'll see that the moment that the camera can, it shoots back out, and that causes this sort of weird whiplash where the camera's sticking to walls behind you. So I did a bunch of research, and it turns out that there's one very common solution to this in basically every third-person game ever, which is just wait a sec before you go backwards. So you'll see that the camera is actually panning backwards a little bit after the fact, right? So in this clip, as I take the camera and like push it into the wall, it'll go in, and then I'll move it back. And it doesn't actually move back immediately. It like waits a moment before it does that. So just talking about usability a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that people who were non-technical designers could also like work with this, right? So I spent a great deal of time programming what I called camera profiles. So all of these stats are essentially all of the things that the camera does, and you can manipulate how those things work. So you can set how far back it stands, right? You can set how quickly it moves forward, how quickly it moves back. You can set how long it takes to look at something. You can set like the field of view if you want to. It's a bunch of other stuff in there. It's a very helpful tool for narrative designers to say like, oh, I want this room to have a camera that's way zoomed in, right? Or I want this room to have a camera that's like really zoomed out, or whatever it may be. And then I did the same thing because we have like earthquakes in the game, so everything's like shaking. So I just want to make a thing to make it easy to make earthquakes move, which was helpful. And then just made like zones. So it's very straightforward. You basically take a profile and all that information, you stick it on a zone, the player walks into that zone, and then the camera changes its mode. So in this case, I'm also doubling that example with splines, which if you don't know, they're like Bezier curves, which I feel like is another big word that doesn't actually help. It's essentially a great way of like drawing really smooth lines in digital space using math. So you can stick the camera onto one of these tracks, and then that track will follow the player around in space. And we could have that set up on these zones. We could have different profiles set up on the zones. It's a grand, helpful thing to make environments work. So this is a sort of different use case of the character controller. I very much wanted to make a horror game for a very long time, so I did. And in this case, the camera and the flashlight are tied together, but that flashlight is moving faster than the camera. So the way that camera moves around and zooms in and out and is sort of positioned on the player is very smooth. It's really slow. It's really heavy. It's like you're holding a camera, but the flashlight is really quick. It's like it's instant, right? So it actually feels like and looks like you're moving a flashlight around while holding a camera, right? And none of this would have been possible had I not spent all of this time learning about the third-person camera controller, even though this is first-person. All right, I'm going to keep going. But if you want to learn more about this specific tool, I've got more to talk about in this talk. But if you want to learn if you want to learn more about this, you can just take a picture of the QR code, because there's a whole blog post where I rant incessantly about all of these problems that I mentioned here in tons of paragraphs. To an unreasonable extent, actually. So, maybe it's not that helpful, but, and then as well, just in case anyone was wondering, there will be a QR code at the end to actually get the whole talk, so you can just watch and review all of this as well on your own time if you need. So the third thing that I'm going to talk about, I think there's only four. We're going to talk about the procedural combat director that I built. So I essentially needed to manage automatically the moods and arcs of gameplay in a roguelike. So the roguelike maps were all varied. They were all very different. I needed something that could actually take those environments and take those spaces and then essentially build enemy waves out of them really quickly and easily. So here's how it works. It reads information from the environment. So like, what enemies am I making? What is the player's location? The shape and the size of the environment, and what are the spawn points in the environment. So it's essentially, I basically just started making a Halo Forge editor in my own video game, which was great. It was super helpful, because now I could just have enemies get placed in the room based off of mood, right? So that took into account enemy behaviors, and it actually changed the arena as it was needed. So this is the very first prototype of that. And you'll see the player is really small and really hard to see on this, so you'll just have to imagine them running around and shooting things. But those enemies are going to be placed in the environment. The green and red icons actually indicate their next position and their target position. But as combat goes on, the player moves around and they kill the enemies, and then new enemies get placed in. And what's actually happening behind that is a whole other layer where the combat director is looking at all of these nodes. And each node functions both as a spawn point and as an information source. And it's asking, where is the player? What are they doing? How much HP do they have? Where are they going? That's what those two gray dots are in front of and behind the player as they move, like right, that one and that one. And it's gathering all this information, and it's looking at what enemies it can spawn, and it's looking at the mood that I'm essentially asking to give it. So in this case, if I you can actually see that based on where the player is and how well the player is doing, enemies will spawn closer to the player and try to kill them faster, right? This is a very early prototype of this game. Right, so like that guy just was put right in front of the player. And granted, it's not a very big room. But generally speaking, it's reading the information, it's understanding what's going on, and then it's putting all the enemies in there, which is crazy, because that essentially means that I can make these gigantic maps and build whatever I want, and then like put the basic pieces of information in there, and then the controller just does everything else. It even has this mode where I started making levels move, which was really cool. So as you fought, the controller would be like, oh, this is too easy, I'm gonna open up all these doors and make all these areas, and then I think, yeah, it fills the room with lava, just because it's like, what if it needs to get really difficult? And I made a ton of maps like this, and it's really crazy, because it's like, wow, this is cool, and it's like doing it for you. It's got its own brain. And a big inspiration for this was the Left 4 Dead 2 combat director made by Valve. That was like a huge inspiration for this. I played a fair deal of Left 4 Dead 2 and just took notes on what was happening, and like how that kind of has like these like points of intense swarms of zombies chasing after you, and then it doesn't really have anything going on, so you can take a rest, and then it kind of alternates between those two core moods. But yeah, that's pretty much how it works, and the result is sick. Like, it let me make probably like 40 different levels and a ton of different enemies that all had their own independent AI going on in there. And when I say AI, I mean enemies in like CS and like basic like CPU AI, not like modern AI. And yeah, it just let me do these things where like I could have these huge maps, and right now the combat director is opening up all these ring firing things, which everybody calls the Mario Galaxy 2 ring firing things, and it's filling the room with lava because it's getting really difficult. I'm like playing really well, and it's like, oh, let's slow it down a little bit, and it's not really changing anything because I lost all my god juice, which is what that's called. And so it's like listening to me, and it's picking up that information in the environment. So I can make the space, I can make the enemies, I can put them in this like area, and then it's like done. I just move on with my life. So I think this is the last tool that I have, and it's code that can hear and be heard. So most of this is going to be, this like first chunk is going to be a bunch of like videos that you can listen to with me, and I'll talk about what's on the screen. So this is Spectrum of a River, and it is a game, or more of a toy, where you hold the keys A through L on the keyboard, and each key corresponds to a different sound. And I pre-produced all the sounds so that they all sound nice together. And the reason I'm showing this is because it was my first ever like sound code. I had never done anything with sound before this. Like a lot going on there, but the basic idea, I think you get the gist. I don't need to play it on the speaker, but everybody does that too. So I took that and that code and how it played sound and understood sound, and I took it and put it into this game. And the idea here is that you can like push these buttons and turn on sounds, and then you discover in the space that there are similar sounds playing. And the objective of this is to figure out that colorless one, right? The first three are like, oh, I can just put those in, right? I can put those first three sounds in. And then that last one I have to figure out. I have to listen. And when you do that, you advance in the game, and you advance in the puzzle. So this is like one of many audio puzzles that I built into this game, which is Chromatic Isle. It's free. It's a free game. This is another sort of audio reacting to environment, where there's a day-night cycle, and the audio elements in the environment change based on the time of day. Granted, a day is like 45 seconds, but... And then the third puzzle in this game, I kind of went a little bit overboard. It's a drum machine. It's like a fully functional drum machine that you can put stuff on, and whenever the tempo marker hits it, it'll like play the sound. So the goal of this puzzle is to actually find those symbols on the drum machine and find the correlating perspective where you view them in the environment. So you can kind of see part of a symbol there, and then when you get close and put those pieces together, you can actually hear where those drums go. And then once you think you've got it, you can actually leave that position, and you can go back to the drum machine, and you can just drop those things down. And the objective of this puzzle is to fill out the whole drum machine, and then you get a cool little reward. You'll have to play the game. I'm not going to show you what it is. And then you already saw this audio. Oh my goodness, Google Slides. You already saw this one, but in this case, looking at it from a different perspective, the breathing is dynamic. The breathing is taking into account how quickly the player is moving around. It's taking into account how quickly they're moving their flashlight around. It's taking into account how much they're zooming in. The breathing picks up when they get scared. I don't know if they actually do get scared in this demo, but it's fun because as players are playing the horror game and they're getting spooked, the character in the game is also like, and they're like breathing really fast, which is just an audio thing, but I think I just wanted to talk about that one thing. And then I started doing like rhythm games with this. So this was a lot of fun because I could take this code and do like beat mapping, and you can get these environments to be really linked and synced up with the things that you're doing in the game. And if you've ever tried to program a rhythm game, you know it's like, this took a long time. It's a nightmare. But what I really like is like the part that comes up here when the beat drops. And I think you get this really cool feel when you start tying what you're hearing to what you're seeing. And there's another I won't play the whole video, but there is a cool part here where it like slows down and then it picks up. And it does like that half step speed. I'm going to play that again just so I can illustrate this. You see how it like speeds up like a little bit before it gets really fast? Like that's like a cool little detail that this code is just doing that, right? Because I've hooked it all together. And I'm really proud of it. And then I made another one that just does a little bit more of this kind of like feel. And this is more just visualization, right? Like you have like the fake spectrometer, and then it's like not a video game at all whatsoever. It's like the same two things that you have to hit the entire time. But the point of me showing you this is so that I can get to this prototype, which was like the first time that I took this stuff and I put it into any kind of playable video game. This was a prototype title screen that I spent like an afternoon on for a racing game where you only drift, and I think I showed it here like 6 or 7 months ago. And this is the title screen, but the gameplay kind of looks like this. And you have this like really cool effect where it's like, it's a very good vibe, right? And none of this is possible without this like linking of what you're hearing and what you're seeing and how that's all tied together. And like, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to tie these two mechanics together, and I am pretty close to something, but I'm not gonna make any promises because I don't have a ton of time. But yeah, like this is a cool thing. Like this is at least neat, and it's based off this audio toolkit that lets me just take these things in the game and tie them to a synthesizer and also audio emitters. So this is just a bunch of random vertices that are tied together and make this weird 3D object. Is it not playing? Oh yeah, it is. But if you listen, it's like making this weird noise. Yeah. But it's just weird because you can import a 3D model and you can listen to it. If anybody wants that, I'll send it to you if you want to. And then this kind of, again, it goes back to like the big game that I worked on for a very long time. And this is at the right time code. So I don't really have to tell you that that was something that meant something because it's just a bunch of like slow-mo noises and then a really big noise, right? All right, I don't need to play that, but but yeah, you can tell that there's something happening here that's like, oh, it's a big deal because there's a guy yelling and it goes, and it's like, that's cool. Sound can really do that. So what's actually happening here? The player plays audio and then a listener reacts to that audio. And the original system was to be set up for the puzzles that I made in that puzzle game. But we're actually going to talk about like the technical side of this right now because I just showed you a bunch of videos, like a substitute teacher. But an audio player will play a sound, and then an audio listener will receive that sound. And when that happens, there's a sound object that is created. So it's literally shooting the sound. It's like throwing the sound at you, you being the listener. And on these things, there's a bunch of information. So the audio player has all this stuff going on with it. The sound object has all this stuff with it. And the audio listener has all these other functions for like what happens when it gets audio, right? It has associated listeners who are people who are, if it's a stealth game and you want it, they're like, hey, I just heard the player. And then they go, oh, it must have been the wind. And then they walk away because that's how that works, right? And then they have like listening distance. So in this case, it's kind of hard to see actually now that I think about it because the TV is kind of small. But that green circle in the middle is the audio player. So that's like, let's say in this case, it could be like the player running around. It could be something that you're looking for. And then there's listeners in the environment which pick up on that, right? And those sound objects are being shot out into the environment. But really, in reality, there is a sound object projecting sound. It's not like you have in real life, there's tons of sound waves coming at you. In this case, it is just a sound object. And those two audio listeners have the hearing distance to hear the sound, albeit at a very low volume for the one further away. I also am very happy with this, that the sound does not go through walls. That's a huge problem in the majority of games. If I want it to go through walls, it'll go through walls, but if I want it to go around the wall, or like in Rainbow Six, where they have, you hear, because if you're at the top of the stairs and you yell, it's not just gonna come like right at me, it's gonna come down the stairs, right? That's a huge thing in games that people don't really talk about. But you can see that there's a severed link between those two listeners. So if this were a stealth game and the noise played from the player, the enemies wouldn't get notified, they wouldn't know. And from a more technical perspective, the audio player has a series of sound objects it plays, and then those associated listeners then have functions that receive it. So You could have an association between two of these listeners. On reaction, they trigger a link to another listener, and then it says, oh, okay, I'll do something because I should react to A, even though I particularly did not hear object A. So it's like, if I'm standing here and I'm making noise, then I can yell, and then somebody else can hear me, right? But if somebody's upstairs and I go, hey, look at me, they're not going to hear me because they're far away. But if somebody's standing on the stairs and re-yells it, basically, then that person upstairs will likely hear it. So this is a person, and this is the best way that I could think to illustrate linked listeners, because I think that it kind of makes sense in video games when you get, in like Metal Gear, you have like the exclamation point. You're like, oh no, oh shit, I just got detected. But no, it's literally this. It's like, if you hear it in one ear, you should not hear it because the other ear doesn't hear it, right? And also, I really desperately just wanted to make this visual. So yeah, in this case, associated listeners, linked listeners, they just hear stuff, right? And if one linked listener hears a thing, then the others do too. This is an example of like positive and negative noises for a puzzle. And then this is sort of illustrated in 3D space with the different nodes and things that play sounds, things that don't. And that's kind of this, I just like programmed this to illustrate like how you would do that. It's just like quite literally an abstract class, which then you have different kinds of listeners associated with it. And then those listeners can have different kinds of listeners too. So if you have one enemy who listens in a particular way, if that enemy is just taking in all those sounds, let's say you could have a subclass of that enemy who then says, oh, I don't need to hear all of this. I only need to hear footsteps. And maybe they just don't react to gunshots. Maybe they're like a civilian in Hitman or something. Well, I guess they would too, but same code is used here for the visualizer that I showed you already, right? It's taking that clip data, that sample data from the actual clip, and it's building out sort of a small data set every single frame. It's capturing all of that, and then that hooks into the post-processing in Unity to get that effect. And this is what it looks like in a puzzle, right? It's got this whole link going on where each of these different buttons is linked to the sounds, and then those sounds are linked to the doors, and those doors do things based on the sounds that are in the environment, right? And that's what it looks like with the sound emitters too. So let's review. There's a lot of stuff that I just said to you. It's probably exhausting, but we'll go through these really quick. So aggregate and holistic tooling, they're aggregate because they're made out of pieces. They're holistic because they obey your rules, right? So the player controller is aggregate because it's a bunch of pieces that make up a modular whole. And it's holistic because I can just throw it in any environment. Like I don't need to actually, I can just use mesh colliders. I can do whatever I want with it. The camera controller is aggregate because it has all these elements to account for different use cases, and it lets non-technical members use it. And it's holistic because it will not get stuck. It will not like clip through things, hopefully. It won't break, regardless of what kind of scenario it's in. And then the combat director as well. It's, you just drop it in a space. I can have it be aggregate so that I can customize it based on what the environment needs. It's holistic because I just build a level, drop it in, and then it goes, right? It does everything itself. The same with the audio systems, right? I can just put it in any space. I can hook it into anything. I can have it play a synth. I can have it interact with environmental audio. And it works based off of the things in the space. It doesn't do things that it cannot recognize. So to conclude, review your own systems if you can. If I could give you anything, it's these three things. I want you to review your own systems in your games and think about how you're going to build your games going forward, right? Are you going to be doing this thing a lot? And if so, can you take those systems and turn them into tools that you can use to build stuff, right? That you can use to make things. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I have to take a photo. And then if you want any of the open source projects mentioned in this talk, please just message me. I can just send you the links. You can have all my code. I really don't care. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. If you're in the IGDA Discord, you can just send me a friend request. My Discord is @Josh, and it actually is just @Josh. I told that to somebody once, and then they just didn't send me a friend request because they were like, you wrote it down wrong. And I was like, what are you talking about? Feel free to email me. If you want this talk, you can scan the QR code. I don't know, is it big enough on the TV? You can, okay. And you can just have the whole thing. Feel free to download it. Feel free to steal it. Feel free to give this talk as me somewhere else if you really want to. But yeah, I really appreciate it. Is it question time? Are we doing?
Yeah, Q&A.
Yeah? Okay. How does this? How do you want to? Do you want me to just any questions? Any kind of questions about anything? Yeah.
I was a little confused by one part of the holistic talk when I think you were talking specifically about controls, because you were talking about like, you know, showing lives to the players and stuff. And my kind of general understanding has been that that's like actually to be encouraged and very good.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, in this racing game I'm making right now,
Uh-huh.
when I have the player like turning left and right, I just roll the model a little up and down
Mm-hmm.
because it feels more like you're turning, even though there's no collider moving, there's no like physical like interaction there. It's just the pod has a little bit of visual feedback. So I guess I understand that like when it's really like visceral, that's great and that really gets you into it. But like, don't we also do a lot of smoke and mirrors?
To be clear, he's posing this question as if I'm not working on the racing game with him. He's trying to be really sly about it. You're right that we do a lot of smoke and mirrors. We do a lot of those things. I think that there are. I think I am a staunch believer that we should always be doing things as much as we can in actuality. And if we can't do those things in actuality, we should represent the thing that's happening as best as humanly possible. Like in the yarn ball game, which is called Unwound, that ball I could not get to roll properly as a ball. So I had to make one physical object that is the ball rolling in the environment, and then I had to make another cosmetic object, which is an exact replica of that ball rolling in the environment, which technically is a model view controller, but it is as close as I could get to that ball actually rolling in the environment. So there are going to be edge cases and points where you're like, this is so much more work to do this. And in my opinion, you should get as close as possible, if not to just do it precisely as it is, you know, in your mind, right? Yeah.
Question about tools as differentiated from just reuse. So, you know, to me, like a lot of it looked like scripts, and then you were kind of like, just expose everything. And is there another step there where it's like, now it's a tool, or
If someone else can use it, that's my biggest thing. If it's like, to me, a tool is anything that I can. If it's like, yeah, you're right. Like there are scripts that I just reuse. There's like, I have like extension scripts and helper scripts and stuff like that. But for me, a tool is very specifically like all of, like it's that, but then also I can give it to a level designer, and the level designer can make 10 levels and they don't have to talk to me, right? Because this one thing is doing all of the question answering and Does that make sense, I guess?
Yeah, it sounds like maybe shaking off some sharp edges, making sure like you had everything sort of nicely, like a little sentence above everything.
Yeah, but it's also the principle of like I think I mentioned this once or twice. I forgot to write it in as like a keyword of the talk, but like I call it like the drop-in principle, that I can just take this thing and drop it in and it just works.
Yeah,
right?
That makes sense.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I forgot to mention it.
Yeah.
Because I'm a silly goose. Yeah.
I had a question going on the back of that, which is if you're building something for someone else to use, then naming is kind of important, and units are kind of important. How do you resolve that?
Naming and units. So the question is, you're talking about like, how do I name, like you're talking about like the gray box versus like white box.
How do you make it so it's easy for someone else to use?
How do I make, okay, that's a really good question, and it's a very long answer. But the shorthand of it, I think, is I understand their workflow if I'm making the tool for them. So I worked as like a 3D artist. So for example, on one of the games I'm working on, I made a series of shaders that have the sliders and have the inputs that they need to make those shaders look good, right? So like in my brain, I'm thinking about that shader as a tool. I'm thinking about the level kit as a tool. And when it comes to units, I mean, I think about like what could be the maximum insane, stupid thing that anyone in their right mind would want to do, and then I double it, right? And then for those sliders, I'll do like a nonlinear curve, so that it like a little bit at the beginning, it's like sensitive, and then it's like, oh, it's like shot up all the way, and then, you know, and sometimes you do want that, sometimes you don't. One thing that I found that helps a lot is just adding a bunch of multipliers in. So, you know, for the driving game, that is further back than I thought it was. Whatever, we'll pretend it's on the screen. And for the driving game, in that case, dealing with like meters per second and dealing with miles per hour is weird, and that's something that I think I actually didn't expect to trip myself up on because I'm using weird freedom units instead of the real one. So in that case, I actually just have a series of multipliers in there for different effects, right? So if I want to increase the car's speed, I actually have like a little thing that's like convert this from meters per second, which is pretty much what Unity is, into miles per hour, and then I can read that out. Is that a good answer to your question? I don't know if
Well, I was
it's...
thinking more of the camera stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Like sometimes people make them like film cameras. Sometimes you have, you know what I mean? Like, does ISO number make any sense to somebody, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's another really good point. For the isometric camera stuff, I have never made that camera work with ISO, but when it does come to different player sizes, like for example, the first person shooter that was shown in that game, the player is like really, really small. Like they're deceptively tiny. They're only, I think, 2 feet tall or maybe 1.5 feet. And inside the camera, there are actually a series of settings for how it responds to height, right? In the Yarn game, the Yarn Ball game, that camera is higher and that player is higher. And then there's, for the full body character controller, that's just a full person. So I guess when it comes to those kinds of units, there are basic levels of how the camera works based off of that kind of stuff that you do set. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Other questions? Yeah.
So if you're dropping a tool in to a game, do you ever get problems where like the esoteric rules of that game kind of conflict with the tool, and you have to like update the tool, or you get this kind of edge case?
All the time, yeah. Like pretty much constantly every single time I use the thing. And then that's cool for me because then I'm like, oh, cool, I have this player controller, but it can't, for some reason, it can't flip upside down. So now I'm gonna see if I can add in that functionality somehow, which was a thing that that's like a specific example that I spent a lot of time doing for like a Mario Galaxy kind of like gravity.
So
and
it's like an opportunity for you to advance the tool.
yeah, pretty much. And then just continuously doing that over and over and adding this new functionality to the thing, to that block, just becomes really strong over time. Yeah, but I constantly I don't think any of these tools are done. It's kind of one of my main, I should have put that in the talk too. Yeah?
So kind of bouncing off that a little bit. So if you're using the same tool in a bunch of different games, there's a tendency, I'm not saying it happens to yours, but there is a tendency with tools to start to develop a little bit of like legacy bloat. So you end up with this long list of things it can do when you only need about like 30% of it for whatever game you're currently working on. Do you do anything to like condense that down or obfuscate it away so that it's not just this massive list of settings? Like, as an example, you showed the camera controller, and it's got all the stuff for handling camera shakes. If you're using a game where you don't need camera shakes, you've got this huge block of code that doesn't actually need to be used. How do you deal with that?
For the final, like if I'm giving it to someone or like the final build, I usually just take it out.
You probably know
Yeah.
what it all does, but I assume you hand it to somebody else.
Right, I usually take that out, right? Like, and I'll also use like editor scripting. Like I've tried using Odin for some of this too, where it's like you can enable advanced tooling or something. I don't remember what I called it. And then it basically obfuscates all of that in the UI in Unity. And then if you check that box for like, oh, you do want earthquakes, it like gives you earthquakes, right? Or it's like, yeah, so like you can, and then I can set it up, and then it just goes right in the Git, and then they just pull, and then they get this thing that's like, oh, cool. I don't have any earthquakes on my screen because I'm not doing anything with earthquakes, and I don't know, but it's like it's a weird thing because then they don't know that they can have earthquakes, and then we get into this weird like, do I just not want earthquakes because I don't know that I can have earthquakes? Like philosophical discussion, but. Yeah, I guess that would be my answer to your question. Usually I don't obfuscate them though.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? Yeah.
No, it seems like you primarily work in Unity. Is there ever a reason that like you wouldn't want to jump ship to something else? Is just the more tools you develop, the more simple it is to develop more games as you move on? Or is there any reason why you want to try something else?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's interesting about that is that I actually did for like a great period of time not want to use Unity, and I ported my entire game, like the first-person shooter, to Godot in C#. And I just had to essentially change all the types for all the custom types in Unity to the custom types in Godot C#. And like 95% of it worked, and the only thing I had to do was basically mimic how Unity's UI worked. with like a canvas and sprites and stuff. And once I did that, it was actually really cool. Like just kind of, it was weird. I felt like Todd Howard. It just worked. I was like, but it's a really good question. And to be honest with you, I don't really want to stay with Unity forever. I do want to move to Godot. And every single time that I do actually go and spend time in Godot, I'm like, oh, this is really cool, but it's like almost there. Like it's almost there. And it's getting to the point where I'm like, it's like the same thing I have about like using Windows versus using Linux, right? Like, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like if I continue using Unity and I build all these tools in Unity, I will just be stuck in Unity. So practice to take those tools and go to other platforms, I think, is something that I am actively trying to do. We just spent all this time working in Unreal for this racing game too, right? Like it's not a single track of development in my mind. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'll be around. I'm going to stay here until like 9. I don't know what time it is. I haven't. Yeah, but please, wait. Please give it up, not for me, because you already did. Please give it up for all of the IGDA folks and all the folks here at Coexist that made this happen.